Hey everybody, welcome to Fantasy R&R. This is your host Ryan, and this is Week 15 Benchums.
This is Fantasy with Rob and Ryan. Fa la 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 Fantasy Football.
This week we'll be giving you notable middle-of-the-pack players that you want to sit with the fantasy playoffs looming above you right now. Let's get started with the Thursday night matchup.
Chiefs at Chargers.
Patrick Mahomes. Although this is going to be a little bit of a surprise, he's actually been on the uprise a little bit with 258 yards passing and 2 TDs in his last outing. That's still underperforming for Patrick Mahomes, and before that he's had some miserable performances for the longest streak of his career. Going up against the Chargers, they're actually on a roll on defense where they have 28 fantasy points in the last 2 outings. Against Kansas City in Week 3, they actually had 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 sacks, making them the expert kryptonite against Patrick Mahomes. This is one week I would actually bench him if you got someone, let's say, Justin Herbert on the other side of the ball. Jared Cook's going to be my pick for the other side of the ball as the 18th ranked tight end on the season. This is actually concerning because he is an all-the-time starter for the Chargers. He's coming off a touchdown performance, but that was 2 receptions on 5 targets for only 8 yards. Before that, he hasn't had a 10-point plus performance since Week 6 against Baltimore, and with that, he only had 4 catches for 25 yards and a TD. He has not topped 70 yards on the season so far. Jared Cook is one of those guys where if you got anybody else you could be take a flyer on, Freiermuth on the waivers, Gesicki on the waivers, anything like that, you want to pick them up immediately and bench Jared Cook.
Raiders at Browns.
Derek Carr, you want to bench him at this point. He started off the season real hot, was actually on pace for about 6,000 yards passing. All of that has died down in recent weeks. He has had mediocre performance after mediocre performance. A couple of times this season he hasn't even scored a touchdown. In the last 5 games here, he's thrown 6 touchdowns, that's it, had 5 interceptions, and fumbled 3 times. So the upside just isn't there anymore, and he's going up against the Cleveland defense that has been on the rise for the past few weeks. And on the other side of the ball, with Case Keenum at the helm, I would say it's time to temper expectations on Donovan Peoples-Jones. If he is your flex candidate, you might want to look elsewhere for a boom or bust option and roll the dice. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to have a hard time going up against this team when he's got Case Keenum at the helm for him. So in one of those performances where he's really the only wide receiver on the field, you can't get used to that too much for this particular matchup. There's really going to be nowhere to spread the ball around. Kareem Hunt's probably going to be out. They're going to rely heavily on Nick Chubb and maybe just kind of spread the ball around as much as they can to confuse the defense. At this point, you're going to want to bench Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Patriots at Colts.
You're going to want to bench Damian Harris for this particular matchup. The Indianapolis Colts actually have a solid run defense, and then one of the higher ranked defenses on the season right now. They've been playing lights out as they head towards an AFC playoff run. Damien Harris, although he did rip off 111 yards on 10 carries for a touchdown, including a 64-yard rush, he's got a hamstring problem at the moment, and he's been kind of limited in practice. He's expected to play, but that's why you're going to want to kind of temper expectations and maybe expect Ramondre Stevenson to handle most of the carries in this one. Damien Harris can be safely benched for the first week of your playoffs. Carson Wentz is probably going to have a rough game, so Michael Pittman Jr. is the guy you're going to want to bench in this game that you probably have on your roster, hoping he's going to be your wide receiver too. Carson Wentz has not actually been on fire for the last few weeks here, with a 3.5 point performance against Jacksonville, under 10 against Buffalo, under 10 against Houston, where they're just rushing the whole time. His best performance of the last few weeks actually came against Tampa, but that's because he had to throw so much to keep up, so he actually turned the ball over 3 times there. I think he's going to have similar struggles against New England, who is first pretty much in all fantasy defenses and second against QBs, so they're going to be hard against the pass, and Pittman's going to have a bit of a struggle in this one as they're going to cover him heavily. It's okay to bench him out of your wide receiver 2 slot.
Panthers at Bills.
DJ Moore is going to be a bench candidate this week. He is putting up over 10 points every fantasy game for the last few weeks, but it's actually been a struggle. Happens real late in the game. They have to kind of force feed him the ball because Cam Newton and PJ Walker are trading off, and they're looking really awful. So Moore, while he does have over 240 yards and a TD in the last 3 outings and 27 targets, I think this is going to be a game where against Buffalo, who has been struggling but still one of the most solid defenses of the year, DJ Moore is going to have trouble getting the ball on a consistent basis, and you might have to expect a 5-point floor from from him. This is kind of a news alert. Bench Zach Moss. He's actually going to be a healthy inactive scratch for the Sunday game against Tampa Bay. Zach Moss hasn't been doing a whole lot with his carries against New England. 8 for 21. That's kind of expected. 7 for 27 against the Jets with one of those lone touchdowns he's had. A little bit of receiving work earlier in the season, but that's completely died off. He seems to have fallen out of favor for once again an underperforming Devin Singletary, which makes no sense. So now it's time to bench Zach Moss for good.
Jets at Dolphins.
Okay, for the Jets, you want to bench everybody. You don't need to have Zach Wilson in against the Dolphins defense. You don't need to have any of their running backs, whether it be guys that are coming back from IR, injuries, COVID, whatever, all the Ty Johnsons, the Michael Carter, whatever. Bench everybody. Don't worry about Jamison Crowder. Don't worry about Elijah Moore, who's on the IR right now. The Jets offense is officially going to be squelched against this Dolphins D. So if you're in the playoffs right now, you don't want to have any of these guys on your roster. On the other side of the ball, Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker just gets hurt off and on. I'm almost expecting him at some point to leave one of these games with an injury, and besides that, it looks like Waddle and Gesicki are going to be the main two targets for Tua Tagovailoa. So just get ready. Even though Tua should have a decent game against the Jets again, I don't think Devontae Parker is going to make all that much of a splash. He's going to be completely touchdown dependent. Only use him if you've got a flex 3 desperation play here.
Washington football team at Eagles.
Terry McLaurin is no longer a wide receiver 1 with the problems that Washington is having getting the ball moving. Every once in a while they have a decent performance, and even when they do, he doesn't really get the ball a whole lot. In the last 2 weeks, he's only been targeted 9 times. This last game against Dallas, he had 4 targets, no catches, no yards, no touchdowns, as Taylor Heineke struggled and got hurt later in the game. So, Terry McLaurin, being the 22nd ranked wide receiver on the season, is no longer a playoff winner for your team. You might be better off going out there and trying to just press your luck with someone like Kendrick Bourne or Van Jefferson, who might still be out there on the waivers. Miles Sanders has been a limited participant on the other side of the ball here, and although he had a pretty decent performance against the Jets with 24 carries for 120 yards, this is going to be one of those situations where I think even if he plays, you're going to have to bench him. They've got a lot of other options to use. Kenneth Gainwell, the rookie, is starting to gain some traction, and I don't think Miles Sanders is going to be an all-the-time game-used player in that offense. So while you can still rely on him for a little bit of receiving work and a number of carries, I don't think he's going to be the workhorse star with Jalen Hurts on the mend to come back. Jalen Hurts might not play, which means Gardner Minshew is going to come out there, who's got a much more accurate arm, and they're probably going to use him in the passing game with the deep threat Devontae Smith a lot more than you'll see Miles Sanders being used. I think you can safely bench him for the playoffs.
Cardinals at Lions.
As we called last week, as a playoff winner that is underutilized and under-rostered in ESPN and Yahoo Fantasy Leagues, Christian Kirk, I would bench him this time. He had his boom game. So every couple of weeks, we'll see him kind of break out for over 80 yards or maybe a touchdown, and that happens about every 3 weeks or so, and now it's happened. After a complete dud performance against Chicago, he actually puts up a surprising performance against the Rams because we knew that DeAndre Hopkins and their other guys are going to be heavily covered. Christian Kirk did put up 3 catches for 86 yards on 6 targets, but going up against Detroit, which is going to be a much easier game flow for the Cardinals, I think he's going to be kind of an afterthought. You can bench him as one of those flex plays. And on the other side of the ball, the Lions running backs. No matter who plays, you're probably just going to want to bench them. The Cardinals defense has been really good against the run and the pass, and right now with DeAndre Swift probably slated to return and Jamal Williams trading off time with the other guy, it doesn't really matter who's going to be in there. The Lions offense is sputtering a lot like the Jaguars, and the Cardinals defense is one of the best in the league. So even though it seems like a good idea to pick up one of these handcuffed running backs who might have their day, I don't think they're going to be as effective as someone like, let's say, Sony Michelle has been in Darrell Henderson's absence. It's probably best to stay away from these guys. Look elsewhere for your playoff winners.
Texans at Jaguars.
Go ahead and bench David Johnson for this one. It seems absolutely ridiculous that he's still 35% rostered, even though he's technically the starting running back, and those are hard to come by. Rex Burkhead is going to be out, and it seems like a good idea to start David Johnson, but every time he's been at the helm and had his chance against terrible teams like, let's say, the Jets, he's not performed at all. David Johnson doesn't have any touchdowns on the season except for a receiving touchdown in Week 1 against Jacksonville, and even then he had 3 attempts for 10 yards and only 3 receptions for 18, so it was a total goal line kind of touchdown that possibly could have been anyone else. It's just luck of the draw. Other than that, he has not had a 10-point performance in fantasy all season long. It's best to just stay away from him. And on the Jaguars side of the ball, Leviska Chanal. It's finally over. This guy's done nothing this year, which is absolutely shocking. For a sophomore season, I can't think of anyone who's been worse than Leviska Chanal as a high draft pick, except maybe Jalen Reagor. Leviska Chanal should probably be dropped to the waivers at this point in all formats, even PPY, PPR, no matter what it is, even though he's got some of that running ability. The Jaguars just underutilize him, and he's still 42% rostered. So if you're out there hoping he's just going to turn it around one week, it's not happening. The Jaguars' offense has been terrible. Trevor Lawrence hasn't been looking all that great. Leviska Chanal with only one 10-point plus performance on the season, 0 receiving touchdowns, 0 rushing touchdowns. I think it's best to just put this guy in the waivers.
Cowboys at Giants.
For this one, I'm going to say Tony Pollard. It's looking like they're actually going to put him in the game after that foot injury, but I would say even if they do, they've got a workhorse back that they can rely on a little bit more. I know Zeke is dealing with his own injury, but to keep it safe, Tony Pollard's probably going to be a little underutilized on a snap count maybe in this one, and Dak Prescott is fine throwing to his receivers, CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, all these guys, Amari Cooper. So Pollard's really going to be one of those last resort options. They're not going to focus the game plan on him. So if you had him in your flex spots most of the year because he's been kind of surprising, having a lot of 10-point plus performances, I would say this is one week where you just kind of want to hold back on him and expect more like 6 to 7. Be ready to bench Saquon Barkley on the other side of the ball. It is noted that he's non-participant most of this week. These are some late news feeds coming through, and it seems like it's the ankle injury that was forcing him to sit out week 6 through 9. And besides, since he returned to action, he's averaging about 16 touches a game for maybe 60, 70 yards at most from scrimmage. He has 1 TD through that span. So even if he came back, it's kind of a boom or bust thing for Saquon lately, and I think they're just going to kind of tender to his ankle here, and you might want to look out on the waiver wires for someone like Devontae Booker.
Titans at Steelers.
Julio Jones is going to be your bench for this week in this game if you're in the playoffs. He's only had 1 week where he had over 100 yards, and that's only the 1 week he's had over 60. So Julio Jones putting up 5-point performance after 5-point performance with a terrible Ryan Tannehill at the helm. I would say it's probably safe to bench him up against Pittsburgh at Heinz Field. Julio Jones is no longer wide receiver 1 territory, and he's not even borderline wide receiver 2 territory at this point. With his injuries and the fact when he's healthy and on the field, he's not getting very many targets to begin with, I would say it's safe to just put this guy on your bench, go elsewhere. Chase Claypool is probably someone you want to bench on the other side of the ball. He's kind of been inconsistent most of the year. He's only got 1 receiving touchdown and 100-yard performance. So even though he had a decent number of targets at 93 yards against the Vikings, he's also had some problems on the field where he did that first down point when time was running out for the Steelers to get that last-second win. So they're probably going to be underutilizing him a little bit and focusing more on guys like Freiermuth and Deontay Johnson, who've been a little bit more consistent and reliable on the field. Although Freiermuth has had a few of his issues as well, he's been a great red zone target with 7 TDs. Claypool is probably not a playoff winner.
Bengals at Broncos.
Do you still own Tyler Boyd? It's probably time to bench him as well. Tyler Boyd is usually a fantasy darling. He's kind of like the B-level, like Tyler Lockett light, if you will. Will have a great couple of games and then kind of disappear for a while. Well, this year he's not even really booming most of the time. He does have a couple of touchdowns and over 600 yards on the season, but Joe Burrow prefers to go to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Even Uzoma is stealing a couple of those red zone TDs. Joe Mixon's been great on the ground, so most of the time the game clock is just moving, and they don't have time to spread the ball to everybody. So Tyler Boyd, while you might have started the year off with him as a flex, you can safely bench him for the playoffs. And for the Broncos, I'll say Noah Fant. There's not a whole lot of tight ends to go around, and it might be shocking that Noah Fant is even higher than Jared Cook on the tight end spectrum right now at position rank 15, but he just doesn't get the job done. 475 yards on 53 receptions with 3 TDs on the season. That's just kind of like middle of the pack, with him being 15, 4 tight ends. And I would say there's probably a couple of guys out there that might have the same upside, but aren't going up against the Bengals, which have been a decent defense for most of the year. You could probably look on the waiver wires right now and find guys like, Conklin and Everett who have TD upside, but also haven't been performing. But Noah Fant really isn't going to be saving anybody's playoff.
Falcons at 49ers.
Kyle Pitts is a bench decision if you've got a certain situation going on like I would, like Jordan George Kittle is on your team, Travis Kelce's on your team, and you drafted Kyle Pitts as a backup, you don't have to worry about, deciding who's going to have the bigger game or the boom game. Now, Kyle Pitts does have over 700 yards on the season. He gets targeted quite a bit, but he's only got one touchdown, which is absolutely shocking for the amount of red zone talent he has. And again, if you got other options like Dallas Goedert or someone like that, I would really think about playing them over Pitts for this particular matchup. And on the other side of the ball, Jeff Wilson Jr. They say he's going to start. It doesn't even really matter if Elijah Mitchell doesn't come back. Whether Elijah Mitchell's in there or they decide to actually use Sermon or it's JaMychal Hasty or Kyle Juszczyk at fullback, the 49ers running back situation has been a mess for years. Even when Mostert played, he usually only get like 10 to 15 carries. He'd go off for 170 and they'd get cute and just be like, well, let's change it up, see if we can confuse the defense. It's never been worth having a running back on the 49ers. So with Jeff Wilson Jr., don't believe the hype. A lot like David Johnson, doesn't matter if he's starting or not. Bench the guy. Do not rely on him to put up a big performance for your first week of the playoffs.
Packers at Ravens.
For this game, I actually feel like the Packers D needs to be benched. They've been pretty decent all year, and everybody used them as a streaming option last week. We called it on the podcast, and they did great. They had a TD on defense and everything. But I think the Ravens, even though they've been struggling, I think they're going to bounce back. They're going to play the Packers hard, and I think Lamar Jackson, if he can come out and play, he's going to have a decent game. Even if he doesn't, I think that Huntley had a decent performance getting the ball to Bateman, and maybe he might even be a little bit more effective in the air than Lamar Jackson's been this year, whether or not he can run like Lamar, which we know he can. On the other side of the ball, Hollywood Brown, because of that. Whether or not it's Lamar Jackson or Huntley, I think Brown is taking a backseat. Huntley definitely linked up with Bateman for over 100 yards. We love to see that. Hollywood Brown's been having a lot of underwhelming performances lately, and the Ravens offense was sputtering. So Lamar Jackson, kind of looking like everybody feared when he first entered the league, he's not really throwing the ball well. In fact, the comparisons to Jalen Hurts, it's kind of crazy. Both of them kind of throw just as bad, and they've got great legs and, can run the ball. But, that's where we're at right now. So Lamar Jackson, he's as bad as Jalen Hurts at the moment. People are calling for Jalen Hurts to be benched. Lamar Jackson, they're just acting like, he should be on the field every time. You can bench Lamar and you can bench Hollywood Brown.
Seahawks at Rams.
For this game, Rashad Penny, do not believe the hype from last week. I hate those knee-jerk reaction pickups. Rashad Penny has been a bust for years. 2018 first-round pick who was picked, I think, 27th overall by the Seahawks. He's been on the same team all these years, had an ACL tear, even though he was pretty durable in college. And then, once he comes back, he never really gets going. They say he was starting to break out before that injury, but it's really not true. He's had a lot of up and down performances. His yards per carry prior to this last performance were absolutely abysmal every time they gave him the chance with the ball. Pete Carroll says he's going to get more chances now, but up against the Rams, it's probably not the best time to expect anything big from Rashad Penny. I would maybe grab this guy off the waivers. If you're in a dynasty, grab him next year if you're low on running backs, but for this particular game, do not expect him to be a flex one. Bench Sony Michelle on the other side of the ball. It sounds like Darrell Henderson will be back. Even if he is, Sony Michelle usually gets some carries, but they underutilize him when Henderson's there. They're going to throw the ball to Henderson over and over again. Henderson will get 20 carries. Michelle will get like 5 to 6. Michelle's been good when Henderson's out. If Henderson's out, I'm still thinking that maybe, up against the Seahawks, Michelle could have a big game. But if Henderson is back, go ahead and bench him. Don't even bother flexing Michelle.
Saints at Buccaneers.
For this game, Taysom Hill. A lot of people are picking up Taysom Hill because he's got that dual threat. We always grab quarterbacks like that. That's the way to go in fantasy now. If they can throw a little bit and they can run a lot, then you got to pick them up because they're basically a running back with TD upside throwing to wide receivers. So Taysom Hill is attractive in that sense, but throwing 4 interceptions in that other game, I really don't think he's got much of a chance going up against the Bucs. New Orleans always game plans for the Bucs really well. Sean Payton's ready for them, but Taysom Hill is going to have a rough one up against the Buccaneers defense that has a multitude of interceptions and sacks in their last 5 games. On the Bucs side of the ball, I would say bench no one. If you've got Fournette, start him. If you have Mike Evans, start him. If you've got Tom Brady, start him. Chris Godwin, start him. Gronkowski, start him. Everybody on the Bucs is usable at some point. They've been one of the best offenses of the year. With Tom Brady looking like he's going to grab another MVP, I would say everybody on this roster is worth starting for your first week of the playoffs.
Vikings at Bears.
For this Monday night matchup, Tyler Conklin. So we were talking about how Noah Fant is kind of in the Tyler Conklin conversation situation. We've been hoping Tyler Conklin would be a usable asset with Adam Thielen off the field, and that just doesn't seem to be the case. So if this is somebody you've been relying on to fill in for your tight ends, I could say just throw him to the wolves at this point, put him back on the waivers. Tyler Conklin's not going to be doing anything for your fantasy team this year. And on the other side of the ball, Allen Robinson is not only benchable, he's probably waiver fodder at this point. I feel like Darnell Mooney is probably the best talent on that field, which is crazy because I really like A-Rob and wish he was back on the Jags. But with Mooney taking a lot of those targets, Kmet starting to get some targets, Justin Fields coming back, and throwing to David Montgomery on screens a lot, it's probably just not worth having Allen Robinson in your roster whatsoever as you enter the playoffs. So Allen Robinson owners, you wanted him to be your wide receiver one on the season. He's now position ranked 81, and I don't think he's going anywhere up against Minnesota, coming off a performance against Green Bay with 6 targets, 2 catches for 14 yards. Put him on the bench. And that's going to do it for the Week 15 Benchums. Once again, this was Ryan with Fantasy R&R. We'll see you next time.
That was Fantasy with Rob and Ryan. Fantasy R&R.
Change, you filthy animal.